So functions. So I'll be taking this theory class before the practical class because I think you should know about functions before you start coding. So in this lecture, the functions are basically a way in which we can reuse codes. We have written one function at a time and then we can call it as many times as we want. So we don't have to write the same codes again and again. So that is what we call functions for. So in functions, there is a function definition in which we can define the function and it is not called. Then there is some calling functions in which when we click or when we call the function, then the function code gets executed. So in Solidity also, we have two things. We have reading transactions and writing transactions. So reading transactions are basically the call functions. So in this, we are just getting the value or we are just reading the value. The writing is known as the transactions. So transactions are basically we are writing into the variables or something while executing the function. So we can see out here there are many types of function. Let me go one by one. There is something known as a view function, which is basically reading from the state. All the variables in the blockchain have a certain state. Once they go into the blockchain, they are having a certain state. So after each block, if we want, only the variable state is changing. So that we know at this block or after this many blocks, what is the state of this variable or what is the value of this variable. So when you put a view keyword, so you're basically just reading from the state. You're not writing, you're not updating, you're just reading from the state or you're reading from the variable, the value. And this can call view functions, this can call other view functions and other pure functions. But it cannot call normal functions. Then the pure functions. These are not meant for reading or modifying the state. I'll show you an example. You will understand this pure function, how it works. And this is only possible for calling the pure functions. It can only call the pure functions, not the view functions or not any other functions. Then a constructor. Constructor is a special type of function which is only called at the time of deployment. So basically what a constructor does, it initializes the variables as in what the developer wants. So it starts whenever you click the deploy, it will call the constructor and the constructor will initialize the variables meant for initializing. And it is never called again, it is only called at the time of deployment. The receive function. Receive function is basically the fallback function which was used before in the like 0.5 Solidity versions and before, but now we are in the 0.6 version and we have the receive. Receive is basically the fallback function. What it does, it is used for directly sending ether from an account to a smart contract. You will get to know this once we are like started coding and all. So what this does is basically it will take any amount which is given to the smart contract and will keep it in the address of smart contract. Then next comes visibility. There are four types of visibility for functions. We have the public visibility, that is it can be called internally like within the smart contract and externally also from outside where we have deployed it, and also it can be called from an inherited smart contract. So it gives all functionality. The private can only be called from the contract it is in, not even from the derived contracts, not outside, nowhere, only from the contract in which it is in. Then the external function, these can be only called from the outer function like outer deployment area or the functions which have inherited them. You can't call it internally or you can't call it from the same smart contract. Then the internal. Internal is basically only from the contract itself or from the derived contracts. It is basically some kind of protected. You might have learned this protected visibility in C or C++, like that in C++ basically. So it cannot be it cannot be called from the outside deployment area, but it can be derived and it can call itself from the contract which is calling it. We have error handling also in Solidity. Error handling is a major part. So in error handling, we have require, assert and revert. So how does this happen? So errors firstly revert the state. Like you have changed some state, but if it doesn't change, it gives an error message. So it will revert back to the latest state it was in, and it will give out a error string if it is handled correctly. So how do we do that? We have revert and require, which returns a string. It will directly return a string which we will get to know that what is the error basically. Then we'll talk about the require function. So require is basically an if condition. So you can think of it, if the account balance is less than the amount we want to withdraw. In that cases, we can use a require function. So in the require function, we will say that this function will only happen if the account balance is more than the amount. So this is what the require goes for. It is basically used for validating user input. So it will check that if the user input, the amount he is telling us to withdraw, telling the function to withdraw, is less than the balance or not. So it's used for that part, and it also gives a error string. Next, the assert. This assert is basically, it consumes all the gases, and it is basically used to validate invariants. Invariants are basically some errors which are unexpected by the user. It comes automatically from the Solidity compiler or somewhere. There are some errors, logical, not logical errors you can say, but it is from the machine side. So these are known as invariants. And so what it does, the assert does that it consumes all the gas. Here require and revert returns the gas, but assert takes all the gas, and it is basically used for validating invariants, and it terminates the transaction. You will get to know after you see the lab of this. Then the revert. What does revert do? Revert basically reverts the transaction and returns the gas. So in this case, it is basically opposite of require. In this revert one, you need a if statement, that if the account balance is less than the amount. So basically the user wants to take out more amount of money than there is in the balance. So it will revert. You will see everything in the lab, so don't panic right now. Then we have some modifiers. Modifiers are very simple. It is basically a function body in which you have the required statements. So what it will do, it will basically act as a precondition. That first we will check this. If this condition satisfies, then only we'll go to the next one and we'll execute the function. Otherwise, we will return back the gas. It works like that. Then change the behavior of functions. So if a modifier is put onto a function, it will obviously change the behavior as the modifier will be executed. It will have some preconditions. It will check it, and then the function code will be executed. So this is how a bit of change will be there. These everything will be told to you in the coming code examples which we will perform.